let's jump right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're looking at two lines on a graph that, quite frankly, absolutely nobody wants to see crossing. Picture this scenario for a second. Your company's healthcare costs are just skyrocketing year over year, but at the exact same time, employee motivation and the actual quality of work are plummeting at that exact same rate. It's a glaring, really painful contradiction, right? I mean, how can an organization spend so much more on its people's health, yet end up with a workforce that's increasingly drained, unmotivated, and just totally checked out? Well, today we are unpacking the insights of the legendary management thinker W. Edwards Deming. Specifically, we're going to look at what he called one of the deadly sins of management. We're going to peel back the layers and reveal what is actually happening beneath the surface of those rising medical bills. And I promise you, by the end of this, it's going to completely change how you look at your company's balance sheet.
Now, to understand this, we have to recognize that there is a stark contrast between what we tell ourselves and what is actually true. Let's look at the report first. When senior managers see those healthcare costs rising, sick leave ticking up, absenteeism growing, the standard corporate excuse you'll find buried in the financial spreadsheets is usually just a simple shrug. It gets written off as an inevitability of the market. You know the drill. People say, oh, it's inflation, or it's an aging workforce, or hey, it's just the cost of doing business, right? But Deming, he saw the reality. He looked right past those sterile spreadsheets and saw what was actually happening on the shop floor. He argued that these rising numbers are absolutely not some market inevitability. Instead, they're the direct evidence of a systemic management failure. We literally have to shift our perspective here. We need to move from a passive acceptance of these costs to taking a deeply analytical look at how we are actually running our organizations.
So the crucial point here is exactly how we define this whole phenomenon. And Deming framed this with a brilliant, though pretty sobering term. He called it a tax on a bad system. I really want you to let that definition sink in for a second. High health insurance premiums, relentless sick leave, the constant need for people to take mental health days, these are not coincidences. They aren't random bursts of bad luck, and they aren't just the medical misfortunes of your staff. They are a direct financial penalty. See, when an organization runs on constant stress, continuous overwork, and toxic unresolved relationships, that environment doesn't just evaporate into thin air. It physically enters the bodies of the people working there, and it eventually arrives right back on the executive desk as a massive corporate medical bill. You are, quite literally, paying a tax for poor management.
To really grasp the weight of this tax, we need to look way past the financial documents. We need to start looking at the invisible organizational symptoms that are actually driving it. Because these hidden symptoms are the breeding ground for that tax. It starts with high pressure. Picture that relentless, unyielding demand for output that just never offers a moment to breathe. The kind of place where an 8 p.m. urgent email is the norm, not the exception. And weekends, they're just an extension of the work week. Next, you have unresolved relationships. This is the silent antagonism, the conflicts between teams or between employees and management that are just never addressed. It leaves this constant buzzing undercurrent of tension in the office. And finally, the do-as-I-say culture. This is a purely dictatorial environment where autonomy is literally zero and fear is incredibly high. Now, on paper, sure, these might just look like abstract cultural issues, but Deming shows us that these toxic conditions physically manifest. They turn into profound exhaustion, immune system crashes, and the urgent need for what we now call psychological recovery time. Basically, your employee's health is quietly absorbing the shock of these bad management practices.
And the crazy thing is, this toxic dynamic doesn't just happen overnight, it builds over time. It operates exactly like a hidden debt. Let's break it down. Look at year one. Leadership makes a shift. They start managing by fear, focusing entirely on short-term numbers and quotas. Maybe they actually hit their financial targets that year, and everyone gives each other a high five. But then we enter year two. Here, the psychological toll is building in secret. The exhaustion is compounding. You don't see it in the annual report just yet, but down on the floor, people are running on fumes. They're sleep-deprived and deeply, deeply stressed. And then, inevitably, we hit year three. The debt finally comes due. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the organization is hit with an explosion of medical claims, prolonged absences, and what management ends up calling their worst year for healthcare. They treat it like some sudden medical crisis. But in reality, it was 3 straight years of systemic abuse finally breaking the system.
When we compare these two distinct approaches side by side, the contrast is honestly staggering. In a fear-driven system, your primary focus is relentlessly chasing those short-term numbers, usually through intimidation or really rigid control. And the inevitable outcome? It's illness. The system literally generates sickness, and you pay for it with exorbitant medical bills. Now, contrast that entirely with a trust-driven system. And to be clear, this isn't about being overly soft or lowering standards. It's about being fundamentally effective. Organizations that intentionally invest time in building transparent relationships and connecting their people to a clear purpose, they inherently produce health. They create an environment where the human organism can actually thrive. People feel safe speaking up about a flaw in the process without the fear of getting fired. And the objective outcome of that trust, lower medical costs, and much higher sustained performance. It is just a completely different way of operating a business.
Which brings us to the absolute emotional and logical climax of Deming's entire argument. And it's a profound one. Healthcare costs are not a medical problem, they are a management problem. Talk about a massive paradigm shift. For decades, executives have been trying to solve high health costs by negotiating with insurance providers, tweaking medical plans, or just pointing fingers at the healthcare industry. But Deming shifts the blame entirely away from the doctors, the clinics, and the insurance brokers. He takes that responsibility and places it squarely, directly onto the management system itself. Listen, if your people are constantly getting sick, the root cause isn't the clinic down the street. The root cause is the environment you've engineered inside your own four walls.
Okay, so what do we actually do with this profound realization? How do we stop just treating the symptoms and start treating the actual organizational disease? Well, here is a concrete, 3-step action plan that you can literally execute this week. Step 1. Pull the data. Review your sick leave trends over the last 12 months. Look for the spikes. Step 2. Once you spot those spikes, consciously acknowledge that this is not a medical case. Don't just brush it off as a bad flu season or random bad luck. And step 3, start asking what systemic issues are actually causing this breakdown. Where are the bottlenecks? Where's the friction? Where is that do-as-I-say culture driving your people into the ground? You have to investigate your own system with the exact same urgency you would use to investigate a massive financial loss.
And that brings us to our final thought. If you are a leader, an executive, or a manager who is seeing these costs rise, I want to leave you with this deeply provocative self-reflection. Ask yourself right now, what changed in my team? It is time to stop looking outward. Stop asking which doctor or which insurance provider is to blame for your rising costs. You have to look inward. What shifted in your culture? Did you impose an unrealistic deadline? Did you stop listening to your people? Did trust just fundamentally break down? Because remember, at the end of the day, your organization's health costs are just the final receipt for how well or how poorly you are managing the human beings in your care. Start asking the right questions, and you might just cure the system. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.